Hello and welcome to Mangasplaining, the show where we recommend great manga to folks who haven't read much manga before. Hosted by me, Deb Aoki, David Brothers, Christopher Woodrow Butcher, and Chip Zdarsky. Follow along with our show notes and reading list at mangasplaining.com. And before we got on, I was apologizing to Chip and David for recommending the feel-good hit of the summer, Nejishiki by Yoshiharu Tsuge.
Why are only Chip and David getting apologies? What did I do?
Well, sorry. You get an apology.
You weren't here yet.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, you were late.
Oh, I was late. Oh, okay. Sorry.
But I'm sorry, too. I mean, it's, well, after some of the little fun, fluffy romances that I've been recommending, I guess this turns the dial in the completely other direction. Maybe this is like watching a Truffaut film. I'm not sure. It's artsy. It's influential. It's supposed to be good for you. But is it enjoyable? We'll find out. We are talking about one of the most talked about, yes, critically acclaimed indie manga ever published. It was published in 1968. Yoshiharu Tsuge, well, I'll get more into explaining who he is a little bit later. But the only way I've been able to describe him to people, and this probably isn't a great analogy, he's kind of like the Robert Crumb of Japan, in that he's like kind of like his indie comics, underground comics god, who people both think is hugely influential. They're kind of peers time-wise, but they're also kind of disturbing and controversial and maybe a little misogynistic in their stories. But their stories are interesting and I guess worth talking about, and we'll find out. We'll talk a little bit more about it today. I've always kind of been fascinated by Tsuge, partly because his work was so often talked about as such an important creator, and so little of his work was available in English until very recently. Previously, I think there was only a story, Oba's Electroplate Factory in Raw, issue 2, back in the 1990s. And then Nejishiki, the first story in the collection we're reading today, was published in Comics Journal, issue 250 back in 2000 and something. Since then, nothing, right? Until Drawn and Quarterly finally got him to agree to publish his work in English. And so they were publishing his work in these nice hardcover collections, with the exception of one book that kind of slipped under the radar, which is The Man Without Talent, which is one of his last published works, done in 1986. And that was published by New York Review of Books a little bit before. But he's a super interesting creator in that he's so well known and so influential, and yet he hasn't published any new work since the mid-'80s, partly because he is just extremely, well, I guess he's really depressed or anxious.
Sounds really relatable.
Yeah, just kind of stopped.
I also haven't done much since the
80s. Wait, you were 5 years old then. Whatever.
Yeah, I peaked in the 80s.
Did he refuse to have his stuff published in English for a reason, or was it just like he just wasn't into the idea?
Chris, maybe you know the story.
There's a couple of conflicting ideas about it. Whenever he was approached, he'd be like, the refrain was, I did my work for a Japanese audience. And so translating it for a Western audience, an American audience, means it would have to lose some of its meaning because the cultural context isn't there. Sometimes it was stated less nice than that. Sometimes there was a little bit more. But my understanding from people that had been trying to get the rights for many, many years was very much that he just didn't want his work translated. And it wasn't.
But it was available in French before English, wasn't it?
So Tsuge's work, as far as I can remember, wasn't translated by anybody. No one could get the foreign rights for it. But when the sort of dam broke, let's say, and things started being licensed out, I think everyone was shocked that that New York Review of Books got Man Without Talent, because there was supposed to be this sort of large international simultaneous licensing effort, something that you don't really see a lot in manga licensing. Usually sort of people go everything on their own. And for this one, it was like they were going to sign the license for every international version, maybe at once, sort of a thing. And all of a sudden, the one book slipped out. It must have been with a different publisher because it was in the 80s. It was a different situation. But like, yeah, I wasn't really talking to anybody at D&Q in that point. So I only heard whispers and rumors, but like no one was happy about that, which I think is like, I think there's a lot going on with this work, but I think that the publishing history in English around the work is also pretty interesting. And now we've, actually got the books themselves. So, it's in the past, but these books are coming out, I think, simultaneously right now in French and Spanish and Italian, and I think at least one other language. Whenever I typed it into Amazon to see what was out there, it was like, version française, version espagnol, like so. Yeah, I think there was a lot of work being put into these books coming out, and it's very, very interesting to see how they've been received, honestly.
I mean, I think most of my experience with his work has only been those few things in English.
Mm-hmm.
And then even at the big manga exhibit at the British Museum, there was only that first page from Nejishiki.
Really? They didn't even have a full story there, eh?
Mm-mm.
That's weird.
The exhibit we saw at Angoulême, which was everything, was all, complete stories, original pages. Yeah. I was told that not even Japan has had that kind of show.
There are a lot of Japanese people there, actually. That that's one thing about Angoulême and the manga art shows that happen there. There are a lot of shows that they get in France that haven't happened in Japan, and it's a different. There's a different logistics to it, and who would show up. I was talking about this. Sorry, and we're getting way off topic of the actual book today.
Yeah, sorry.
But I think I was talking to Taiyo Matsumoto, and he's like, when he first came to TCAF, and I'm like, oh, so this must be sort of a regular thing for you. And this is 2013, and he's like, no, I've never done a signing in Japan before. And I'm like, what do you mean you've never done a signing? He's like, I can't do events in Japan. Like all of my books like sell like 100,000 copies. If I showed up anywhere, it would be a zoo or like chaos.
What?
So coming to TCAF and coming to Toronto, it was maybe he's only done since then, I think 2 shows, one in Japan and then one somewhere in Europe. I think, and he went to Angoulême that year as well. So 3 now. And it's just like, yeah, man, sometimes you have to remove something from its original cultural context for it to sort of be able to see the light of day. Even there's all maybe I don't know how much of Tsuge's work is in print in Japanese, but I don't think it's 5 beautiful hardcover volumes. I know I could go to any Mandarake and pick up at least a collection of his work and used because it was so popular that somebody printed. Yeah, seeing this in this specific edition on the other side of the world is really, really interesting. I think we're very fortunate in a lot of ways, actually, that D&Q and Asakawa and Holmberg put this together. But we haven't even talked about what the book actually is yet. Maybe we should. Yeah. Maybe we should read the back of the book. Read the back of the book.
Let's read the back of the book. Here we go. All right. It says, the most critically acclaimed comic of the Japanese counterculture. Nejishiki unveils the most iconic scenes from Yoshiharu Tsuge's highly respected body of work alongside his most beloved stories. A cornerstone of Japan's legendary 1960 counterculture that galvanized avant-garde manga and comics criticism, the title story follows an injured young man as he wanders through a village of strangers in search of emotional and physical release. Other stories in this collection follow a series of weary travelers who while away sultry nights and face menacing doppelgangers. Even banal activities like afternoon strolls uncover unsavory impulses. The emotionally and erotically charged imagery collected in this 3rd volume remains as shocking and vivid today as it did upon its debut 50 years ago. Tsuge's stories push boundaries, abruptly crossing the threshold of conventional storytelling. Unassuming protagonists venture further into eerie symbolism against a shadowy, perceptibly dreamlike landscape easily mistaken for the real world. The angst that pervades post-war Japanese society threatens to devour his characters and their pastoral sensibilities as each protagonist's wanderlust turns surreal. That's a whole lot of.
That's a lot of text there.
I just felt like it feels like I went into this really academic space right there. Whereas I think like Tsuge's work gives you a real visceral reaction. I'm curious. I'm pretty sure this is Chip's first time. David, is this your first time reading this book? his work?
Yeah, this is my introduction to Tsuge for sure. I guess I shouldn't say introduction. I'm sure I've seen his stuff in Garo before, but I've never like read it or like recognized it as like, oh, this person made this thing. If that makes sense, it was just something that it was maybe around.
Yeah,
Because I generally like Garo and the idea of Garo, but I haven't really dug too deeply. But I like that you mentioned that this was really academic, like an academic presentation, because I was kind of surprised at the juxtaposition of like the counterculture subject matter and the academic like wrapping around it. Because I think there is something where like underground stuff or transgressive, the right word, maybe?
I think so. Yeah.
Where like stuff like that from the past has to be kind of dressed up in like a scholarly or kind of literary dress for us to get access to it again.
Yeah.
It's addressed like 4 times in that sentence, but you get me. And this is definitely one of those. Like when I got to the notes at the back of the book, I was like, what are these for? And then I realized, because we read this, digitally, and the notes precede the essay that they reference. I was like, oh, there's like 30 pages of biography of Tsuge in this book. That's interesting.
That's a fault of the PDF, by the way.
Yeah.
I made the same mistake. I got 20 pages and I thought, when is this introduction going to end?
Not an introduction. It's a feature-length essay on the history of, the Times and Tsuge and the publishing. And academic wrapping is a really good way to put it, because anyway, sorry, could you please continue?
Yeah. I looked at the PDF and I I didn't read it, obviously, because I'm me, but I went past all the biography stuff and then I started reading, and I got about 20 pages into the story before I realized I was reading it backwards. I'm like, this does not make any sense. And then I realized what I'd done. And so then I went to the other side of the book and started reading the actual beginning story. And 20 pages in, I'm like, this doesn't make any sense.
I was afraid of that.
Yeah. This is like deep underground comics, I think.
Yeah.
I had a similar reaction as Chip, I think. I like that it's so drawn. Like it looks like a comic, and it's going to sound maybe ludicrous, but it looks like a black and white comic, where a lot of comics we read happen to be black and white. But this is like a guy who's like excited to work in black and white. Like Taiyo Matsumoto is another one of those guys, I think. So I appreciated a lot of the craftsmanship, but I felt really disconnected from most of the stories, especially how like ownership of ends work in Japan. Exactly. But like,
please explain.
Because there's like 2 different stories where someone like attacks and a lady who works at an inn, and then is like, well, I guess I work here now, and we're gonna grow old together.
That's how it works.
It's just a wild time.
I just want to say that that's not how inn ownership works in Japan.
Could have fooled me.
To my best knowledge.
But it's weird because it's one of those ones where I can tell the stories are really, like, even just flipping through while I talk, I can see like, oh, this story about the guy who meets Mokiria Tavern Girl I thought was kind of cute. But like the whole book didn't necessarily hang together for me. But I would be willing to try more in this series, if that makes sense. More from Tsuge, more in this hardcover collection.
I would say read the earlier stories because they're a little bit more narrative.
Yeah.
And they're kind of like, if you like Tatsumi, you'll like the 2 earlier volumes, I think.
Yeah. And one of the interesting things that David said about like not being able to connect with it, like I felt the same, but also the story is about people who are disconnected. So it kind of worked on that level. It's just like, I can't connect with this, but also the characters are just kind of floating through and not connecting. And even when they do, it's usually just through, sexual violence, frankly. And so I felt like on that level, maybe I got it, but that's probably the only level I really got it. I always like to think of myself as someone who is right in the middle between like the Comics Journal and Wizard Magazine in my interests, but it turns out maybe I'm more towards Wizard. I don't know.
That's fair.
That's we've all got to be somewhere.
I could see it. I think when you described this as Screw style, I was expecting something a little more out there. Like maybe more toward something even more like this is very representational. Like I think his draftsmanship is very strong. But I would think of maybe expecting something more abstract or like Crazy Cat looking, maybe, where it's very unreal.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, I don't quite understand the Nejishiki aspect of it, other than like the literal, screw in the kid's arm.
That's it.
I think that's it.
I think that's what it means.
So it's less an adjective and more just a title, I guess.
Oh, so you thought screw meant something like screwing?
No, more like
or screwball, or
maybe screwball.
Oh, screwball. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Huh.
Well, screwball.
So what does Nejishiki translate to?
Screw style.
Screw style.
Yeah,
screw style.
But it refers mostly to the the screwing in the kid's arm at the end of the book. Not anything sexual, although sex happens in the story.
Yeah, because there's a I guess a subgenre of rap music, say, called screw music, which was created by DJ Screw in Houston in the 90s, where essentially like you drink codeine and listen to records that are played at a third speed or whatever. There's like a whole culture around it. It sounds amazing. It gives you heart attacks, so please don't do the drug part. But it's a thing where they kind of turned this strange thing, like they take something normal and stretch it into a new shape. And I think I was expecting something similar here, where it's more out there underground, rather than being kind of a Crumb underground, like you mentioned. I think Crumb is actually a great comparison for this guy, especially the way he draws thighs for some reason.
There's that. Yes, there's that. Chris, I want to give you a chance to jump in.
I wasn't sure how I was going to talk about this book, because it's very I don't know. I hadn't read any Tsuge. Obviously, it wasn't available in English except for the two stories, because luckily I worked at a comic book store that always seemed to have a copy of Raw #2 in stock, so I could pull it down gingerly off the wall and flip through. The Mezzachelli in there too is really good. But yeah, I read the whole, or most of, I might have skimmed it a couple points. I read most of Ryan Holmberg's essay at the back to give what I had just read some context. I'd read the whole essay, and it was really clear on reading the essay that these stories were both a progression from his earlier work and a reflection on that earlier work, which was these stories about these pastoral spaces in Japan that were disappearing because of the rapid sort of citification of the city following World War II. And reading this and jumping right into Nejishiki as like the first story, where you have no idea maybe what's going on, is interesting because we haven't read the first two volumes. And I think that I think that we lack the continuity of it. I was like, man, maybe I should just read those first two volumes somehow before tomorrow morning, except I'm in Tokyo right now and it was late at night. There's no way I was going to break into Kinokuniya to grab 2 more volumes of the collected complete Tsuge, which will be 7 volumes eventually, by the way. So this is number 3. But then I was like, no, man, this is the book. Like, the people that were in my sphere anyway, that knew about Tsuge knew about him through Nejishiki, because that was the story, that was the short story that was reprinted in the Comics Journal. That was the thing that people had read, and that the only thing you could really point to and say, this is why this guy's so important for the longest time. So a lot of people, I think, are going to pick up this volume, and it's going to be sort of dreamy comics, sort of Robert Crumb comics, sort of all of this other stuff that we as sort of Western manga fans or art manga fans haven't had a chance to really fully, like, if you've read a lot of Mizuki, especially if you've read Ryan's essay at the back and read a lot of Mizuki, suddenly a lot more of this book makes sense. If you read like Onwards Towards Our Noble Death and the Kitaro stuff and whatnot, like, oh, okay, so this is like a guy who in his off hours while he's doing these stories is drawing like fully rendered lush Shigeru Mizuki stories for the Shigeru Mizuki studio. Like, okay, that kind of explains some of where the drawings come from. Okay, Gato magazine. If you've read other Gato contemporaries that have already been translated, mostly by New York Review of Comics and Drawn Quarterly and a few other companies like Seiichi Hayashi, for example. Oh, okay, I kind of get a little bit more of what the vibe was when these stories were coming out. And you could start to piece together all of these ideas in this work. And the more that I started to really work to piece it together, the more I appreciated it. But I also think that, like, this is going to be most people's first experience with Tsuge. They're going to pick up Nejishiki because that's the story that they know. And 7-volume hardcover series, you might pick and choose rather than going for the whole deal, right? And this is going to be their introduction. And it's like a lot of the context for this work is buried in a 30-page essay at the back of the book. And if you don't come to it naturally, it's maybe going to be a really, really hard read, actually, in a way that the first 2 volumes in the book, which were sort of, again, those more pastoral short stories, as far as I went and started reading reviews of the first 2 volumes. I was like, is it just me? Am I stupid? That, like, people are, I'm like, man, I'm having a hard time with this one. And it's like, no, the first 2 books were apparently very, very different. So yeah, I don't know. I think that you can judge a book based on how it's presented to you. But also this exists in a continuum of a lifetime of work and a continuum of a hardcover book series. So I would have a hard time judging it harshly at all without having read the rest of the work. Because I think that, at a certain point, a creator just deserves us to actually pay attention to their work if we're going to engage with it. So
is there any other
I'm a little
like medium where a book doesn't stand on its own?
Yeah, like novels. Like if you started Lord of the Rings with, third one.
Yeah, but that's a sequel. There's a difference between a sequel and like individual stories as part of an oeuvre.
But don't you think that Tsuge had a point, like where he was afraid of his work being translated without context?
Yeah, actually, I love that.
Oh, yeah,
reason.
he absolutely was. Yeah. He was not wrong.
Yeah.
And I think that they're going out of their way to give as much context as possible for the work at the back of the book. But not everyone is going to read that to be charitable. I don't think everyone's going to read that. I think it's for hardcore, like, wonks, like, you know what I mean? And I think that's going to make it.
I think if you buy this, if you purchase this book, you'll read that. Like, I mean, obviously I did not, once again, because of who I am. But if this was a book that I bought a physical copy of to put on my shelf, I would read the essay for sure, because it's part of it. Like, it's part of the art comic experience of this. I probably wouldn't read an essay after reading an issue of Thor. But something like this, for sure, because like there's clearly stuff going on in here that there needs to be context for. You kind of want to know the history of it all. Yeah.
Would you read it immediately after reading the comics? Or, because I was thinking, like, I wish there were like short essays in between each chapter, each story.
I mean, that would be great. Yeah. I much prefer that idea.
Yeah, I kind of feel the same way.
Yeah.
Or I wish they were shorter, because like I'm fascinated by this guy, but I found those essays to be a slog. Sorry, Ryan.
It's a lot. Yeah.
He put a lot of work into it, and it deserves careful reading. But it took a lot out of me to read it.
It struck me almost as like there's like a good biography of Tsuge happening in these hardcover collections, which is pretty cool. But not necessarily what I was looking for after finishing reading all the stories and having like different questions about them.
So we should take a step back, though, because I would like, and I'm not hosting, I know, but I would love to know this. So the first story, Nejishiki, dream story, wandering through endless, through an endless town that you can't escape from. Sure, a lot going on there, difficult to parse at times. But I found that the other stories were more traditionally narrative and definitely worked as short fiction in a sort of a short story, short fiction vibe. Did you guys not agree with that? Like again, Sunkan in, where he's basically coming back to town and like everyone's, both, oh, you look just like the guy who runs it in the story that we told, but also you can't go back there. That seemed like a pretty straight ahead, existential horror story to me. Like, did you have a hard time with it? Anybody?
I don't think it was a hard time so much as like it was slippery as a story. Like I kind of got the horror aspect, and like the last page, when you see the guy with the mask is like a great image again. But I didn't buy the dread, I suppose, that the people were feeling. Like almost like the chorus, like don't go in there, yada yada yada. And he's draped entirely in shadow while they're like fully rendered in decent color. It's like I like the look, but I don't buy what it's selling.
I agree.
But there was like a cool kind of maybe David Laphamy feeling to it a little bit.
Yeah. Also, the Laphamy bit is like on page 44, where he goes, "Nothing but what, ma'am?" And she goes, "We be nothing but ghosts." And it's like the full panel.
That was so weird.
Stray bullets as well, weirdly.
Yeah. And maybe that's where I've been wanting to rip that off for a long time, and it was funny to see that reading this. Be like, oh, it's what beat me to it when my mom was a child.
Yeah, it's like I kind of agree with David. Like I can see that there's a feeling of dread in here. I didn't quite feel it fully, but also like so much of this is like through the lens of modern day. Like maybe back in the day, like this is so avant-garde and different that it would just like be unsettling for someone to read something like this, which is, this is an Astro Boy. What the heck? What's going on here? I was having this discussion last night with some friends who were, we were talking about revisiting novels we read when we were teens or in our early 20s, and like how when you go back to reread it, it's like, oh, this feels like cliche filled and like not really like hitting it like it used to. But then you realize like, well, maybe that thing started something, and then everyone copied it, and you've read all that. Now you've gone back to see the original, and it doesn't quite work anymore because the whole idea of what that earlier work has been replicated and kind of picked apart, for decades after. And I think a lot of these pieces kind of feel that way to me. I mean, besides like the disconnect from like the large amount of sexual violence in this, but there is also just like, this must have just hit like and felt so strange and weird when it first came out. But I've read a lot of strange, weird books since this. And so going back to it, I'm just like, yeah, okay, I get it. Kids wandering around, seeing some stuff. All right, cool. Looks good.
When we read An Invitation from a Crab by Pampania a couple episodes back, and I kept referencing Nejishiki. Like, this idea of this person wandering these streets and not running into all these kind of surreal things. And then just kind of rolling with it, right? Like it's weird, but it has a dream logic to it.
Yeah.
So, but whereas Pampania's work, I think, is more gentle, or it's disturbing, but not like you don't imagine like that little Pampania character, I don't know, ramming her houseway down while she's stuck in the mud. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
Thank you, Pampania, for having that restraint.
Yeah, some scruples. Yeah, I like the point about this, like reality catching up to this a little bit, because that was exactly my experience with Blade Runner when I finally saw it. It was like 2016 or something. It was very recently. And after growing up loving like Akira and all these other things, like I didn't call myself a cyberpunk fan, but I realized a lot of what I loved had basically grown out of Blade Runner. So when I saw that movie, I was like, oh, this is fine. Which is not the reaction people want when you watch Blade Runner for the first time. Like, it's good, but I get it.
That was my problem with Blade Runner too.
Yeah, the most anti-Blade Runner podcast.
It's true. When my first year in art school, art fundamentals, like we had a teacher who just insisted on showing the whole class Blade Runner because most of us hadn't seen it. You could tell it was the teacher's favorite movie, and like I fell asleep like maybe an hour in.
Whoa!
Like it was like, oh man, like this is like, this is so boring.
Yeah, really.
But it's because of the reasons that David says.
And this isn't that. It's not. I don't think it's boring at any point, but it is not weird, like Chip was saying. Like we've seen weirder at this stage, and even the ones like the last story I thought was pretty unsettling, A Summer Memory, where the guy's like racked with guilt over essentially molesting an injured woman. Like I thought that was one of the strongest in the book, but still like not worse than your average chapter of Gantz.
Yeah.
Like there's...
Yeah, but Gantz has no guilt.
Yeah, but it goes so far, I think, that it sort of... There's like a window of acceptability, And I think it's shifted a lot to where the things that freak us out in books now are like a lot more visceral and personal. While here, maybe just the suggestion of doing something untoward to someone who's been injured was enough to... This makes us sound like horrible people, and I'm saying it all out loud.
I guess what makes it disturbing is that his work feels, autobiographical in some ways, or very personal.
Yeah, and that adds a level of
Creepiness
definite
to it.
It's the crumb
viscerality
thing.
to it. It's like
Yeah.
he keeps drawing himself into it. And it is absolutely the crumb thing. It's like, oh, I'm going to draw my fantasy, but I'm going to create a bunch of characters to act out that fantasy is very different than, and here's a self-insert fantasy character doing those terrible things. And I think that, like, that didn't, like, I get that is definitely a theme in this, but, like, it was also, it's like, this is exactly a product of its time.
Oh, for sure.
If you've read,
I think that's
some of it's to shock, right? To say, like, you know, that society is awful and like what Japan's going through now, post-war is ugly. We're not great people. We're not honorable. Awful things happen. People do awful things, and it's very, you know, raw that way. But at the same time, it's also, I don't know if anyone has done autobiographical work, and like there's a point where you do some stuff that's really dark and personal. And then you go, whoa, I don't know if I want everyone to know this. And then you back away from that precipice, right?
Yeah.
And then with Tsuge, like, and what makes sense in his depression and his anxiety is that I feel like it led to a logical end. Like his self-loathing and his anxiety, and it's like it didn't make sense to me for a long time why someone who was considered to be so talented and so influential stopped drawing since the late 80s.
Sometimes you just run out of things to say in that medium.
I guess.
You know?
But it blew me away. Like, I couldn't understand. And then I met him and his son, and then I read more of this work, and I thought, oh, okay. It's not so easy, is it?
David said that this one had the most dread in it for him. And I think part of that is the fact that, first of all, it's the only one with like a female character that's actually like kind of not being attacked, even though there is another one being attacked in the story. But like his partner, his wife, the fact that there's another character to kind of create this sense of danger. Like if she finds out, like it's not just this guy, you know, kind of off on his own on a journey and something bad could happen to him. It's like something bad could happen to their relationship because you've got a whole other character in this as well. And the fact that she is painted as quite normal and charming as well kind of added to that dread, I felt. Like she's not a weirdo or like a specter or anything. Like she's just like kind of going along with this.
Yeah, she's just supportive, I think.
Also has some great bits of comedy about him being a manga artist.
Yeah, like when he tries to get out that certificate that says
I'm a good person.
Yeah, that he just gave them some old artwork. Like that's going to prove to the cops that he's a good guy. Very, very funny. Yeah, that felt like the most whole story to me, and also just kind of like the best ending too, where he doesn't really kind of learn his lesson, and you have that really great drawing of the woman from before, with the arm in a sling, but her face is kind of in shadow from her parasol. Like it's really nice and creepy. Yeah, I think that's probably my favorite story out of all these, even though it was still disturbing in a way that I didn't enjoy.
We were talking offline just a minute ago about how like I didn't read all the stories as autobiographical or like semi-autobio. They didn't really have that vibe for me until like the comics guy showed up in this one. When he draws a picture of what happened to his sandal, and his wife is like, "Oh, I like the zzzz part. You can really feel it." Like that's such like a nice touch, you know?
Yeah.
Like the supportive partner, and also like he's a decent illustrator. But he is just such. Yeah, the way he bounces off her, like she's supportive by default. Like she doesn't even realize there's a thing to be supportive for, and she's still kind of there for him while he's melting down, kind of inside. Yeah, it was solid. What did you think about that one? I thought it was interesting.
I thought it was an interesting short story. I thought it was well done, and the tone was really different. Even though it had dread, it was a different kind of dread, I think, than the sort of existential horror of the Master the Ging Sankan in one. And that was actually one where I wanted to go back, and I actually read the notes right after because it was the end of the book. So I skipped to the part that is about this book story specifically, because the introduction of like all of a sudden this lonely wandering character for the first 5 or 6 short stories gets a girlfriend when he's like shows himself to be sort of the most morally repugnant person in a story. Sure, okay. And it absolutely reflects when Tsuge had a girlfriend in real life. And then when it was like, oh, you're telling stories about you and your girlfriend now, he was like, no, that's not about her. Like full on. It's kind of amazing, actually, where that's not what that is. The suggestion is, and he sounds kind of angry, actually. Like the suggestion is ludicrous or something to that effect. I'll throw the quote in the show.
I would never date such a kind woman.
Yeah, right? Yeah. Like, anyway, they ended up getting married and having kids. Or a kid.
One kid,
this short story was, I think, maybe the most traditional narrative, like with a beginning, middle, and end and everything. Rising tension, the whole 9 yards. And, I thought it was fine. I thought it was good, but I didn't think it grabbed me like some of the other ones.
What was your favorite?
I think my favorite one was probably...
Yeah.
Favorite one was... Sorry, and then the crab, I think, was... I wanted to mention the crab because Deb mentioned... Well, before I get to my favorite, I want to talk about this part. We actually have read a lot of things that are like the antecedents of Tsuge's work, and Panya's Invitation from a Crab, which is largely inspired by the crab in the story. Like a mysterious crab shows up one day and this character follows it to wherever it could be through pipes and things like that, even though it's like not supposed to be this far from the sea. That is like the beginning of Invitation from a Crab, and it just goes obviously in a very different direction because it's influenced by the whole body of work rather than just the story. So we are getting, I think, like Chip was saying, these stories 50 or 60 years down the road, 50 years down the road, after all these people have like ingested these ideas and been awed by them, and maybe 2 or even 3 generations of filtering down through work. It's not like Panya went and read Tsuge and then made comics, sure, but like a lot of people who are influenced by this work are influenced by the people that were influenced by this work, or by the people who were by the people who were influenced by this work. So I think that creates a really weird expectation. And in some ways it's like like a lot like film for me, where it's like you go back and, is this going to be, this person's really groundbreaking. And it's like, except for the most visceral, most extreme stuff, which in this case is the sexual violence, which is like repeated and like really rough, actually, everything else kind of feels a little bit more tame. Whereas at the time, it all felt like that. When you saw like him deciding to casually like force himself on a woman, like the lead character in these stories, everything in that story felt like that, like the way that our gut feels. And I think that there's a lot of power there and a lot to talk about there as well. It's like there's a lot going on there. But the crab story, I think, is interesting because it does really outline how much he influenced a certain, like a wide swath of manga that came after him, that he probably would disown too if you told him. You know what I mean? Like, he doesn't seem like the kind of person to go, oh yeah, that was definitely influenced by me, because he doesn't seem like he reads manga. Like, he would never even know, or like wouldn't necessarily see it. So I think that's a weird thing. Kind of fascinating.
Like, recently he was like chosen as like some kind of manga ambassador.
That's a weird call, man.
Right? And he accepted, and I was like, wait, what?
Is he grumpy, or is he particular about his work?
My understanding is he's flat out grumpy. Like, he's a grumpy dude.
I could not even dare to ask for an interview at all. I spoke with his son, and that became more fascinating as I got to read more of the work. Like, we were just kind of talking casually, and he goes, oh yeah, all his work is just was lying in stacks of paper around the house. And then when we got asked to do this exhibit, I lifted up a few pages and all the little bits of type fluttered away.
Yeah.
And he and a friend had to painstakingly re-glue each bit of lettering back on for the exhibit.
I have 2 quick stories about that. One, the Otomo book that I got to edit, Akira Art of the Wall. Otomo paid his son and the dude who ended up doing the mural stuff to go through all of his artwork for the Genga exhibition and actually make sure that all of it was there. And they just talk about and things were falling off and we had to reattach them. And there was it's the entirety of Akira. So there was a couple thousand pages, and it took us days. And then they're all laughing over it over beers in this interview in this book. But it is so, if you are a behind the scenes wonk on like this kind of comic stuff, the interview in Akira Art of the Wall is actually insane because it's the first time Otomo talked about Akira or any of that stuff in like 20 years. It's great.
Wow.
But the second one was I went to when we did the Matsumoto exhibition. Sorry to keep going back, but we did the Matsumoto exhibition at TCAF. No one had done an exhibition of his artwork, I think, outside of Japan before. So we went to the Shogakukan offices, and they're like, "Here's all the pages you requested," and then they just dropped a stack of artwork on the desk of like I think I only asked for 30, and I think they would have given me more now, but like 30 or 40 pages. And I'm like, I picked one up, and yeah, the lettering fluttered off of it, and I'm like, oh my god, save that. And they're like, why? Like Matsumoto was like, I think the idea is he didn't draw that lettering. It was literally just like laser printed and then like stuck on with Elmer's glue or some shit. Like for him, that wasn't the art. Like his art was the art, and the lettering that was like pasted down by an editorial assistant. Like there aren't generally letterers as we think of them in the West on those comics, and it's all just fonts. Like it's all fonts all the way down. They're just like, yeah, whatever. Like it's not something that I put on there, so if it flutters away, you don't have to worry about it too much. And I'm like, oh, I'm worrying. So I didn't reattach anything, but anything that fell off, I kept and included back with the artwork. So it was just a little baggie of tiny pieces of lettering, like individual characters that were returned with the artwork. And I think they were probably
like, sir, drugs goes in these normally.
Yeah, it's, like, no, it's just tiny letters. It's not acid, I swear. So yeah,
I realize, speaking of a summer memory, it runs like 151 to 170-ish, maybe.
Yeah.
It's like the length more or less of like an American comic. And it reminded me of actually a chapter of 100 Bullets, where two people find a lotto ticket in a recent car wreck. There's like a little morality play and conversation. It plays out very differently, but it has kind of a similar like guy and girlfriend kind of bouncing off each other morally aspect.
Oh.
And, Eduardo Risso, amazing artist, and it's cool to see how Tsuge draws a lot of night scenes in a similar way. The way he draws grass with the body laying in the grass is really striking on page 155. Yeah. How it's just like streaks of white almost,
Yeah.
Like I would guess
it's awesome.
It's paint, probably.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like white out or something, right?
Yeah. Like I'm sure if he did it nowadays, it'd be like a Posca marker or something, but... Like, I don't want to, even though the stories didn't always connect with me here, they did make me think a lot and, like, really appreciate the way that he was telling them. And he employs so many different styles, even just from, like, the Mokiri Inn chapter. Like, when the guy's immediately cartoony, I was like, oh, okay, this could be going places, because he looks like, he stands out against, like, that starkly representational background. I don't know, it's a good-looking book.
Yeah.
There's some really beautiful page compositions, I gotta say.
Mm-hmm.
When you see them individually, that's like, and some are really striking, like this one, like just this picture of this woman naked.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I was gonna say that. So you're flipping through the page and you read the beginning of the book, and everything is kind of like either Nejishiki, where it's like everything is kind of weird, and occasionally will be like one background that's sort of horrific but also really well rendered. Or you get the stories that have the sort of beautiful Mizuki-esque, like really lush backgrounds with like cartoony characters in the foreground. Yeah, like, and it's like, okay, that's cool. I kind of get what he's doing here. And then you flip to the next story and he completely inverts your expectations by doing a hyper-realistically rendered person. That's like proper proportions and everything too. In a like the whole thing looks like it's shot from photographs, and then you read the essay at the end, it's like, yeah, that was actually, these are photo nude studios where you would take photos of ladies, the whole thing, that kind of thing. And it's just so different than the stuff that came behind it that it did replicate some of that shock for me. Like you imagine you think you're getting a new Tsuge story and it's like, oh, this is like a, that usually tells stories about going up into the mountains and finding weird villages. And then you open it up and it's just like a full page of a lady spread eagle. And you're like, oh, okay, he's doing something different this month. Like that's wild that these stories are in chronological order and you sort of see what came before and then after with Summer Memory, where it's like everything has been sort of taken to a different place. It's really, really neat. It's like a wild situation.
I think I realize also why some of the countercultural aspect is not quite hitting with me. Is because social media is so debased at this point. it is just like the worst thing in the world. So comics have to reach like even higher, you know? Because you talked about like seeing the shock of a nude woman on a comics page. I was like, oh, that's not shocking to me anymore. And I don't know when that happened, you know?
It was shocking to me because of the context of this book. Like, I went to Comic-Con this weekend. Comic Market, the Dojinshi Festival. I'm not shocked by going there. I was not shocked by large banner roll-ups of extremely nude ladies and gentlemen, you know, all lushly rendered with like beautiful Photoshop, you know, whatever. Not shocking because of the context of it. But the context of this book, where it's like everyone's kind of drawn not quite to realistic human proportions for the first couple stories, and then you flip the page and it's like, here is literally a traced photograph of a lady. It is so different in tone and style than everything that preceded it, and then sort of influences the stuff I think that comes after it, that it really is about just context on context on context. And actually, this is my favorite story in the book, even more so than Nejishiki. I think Master of the Willow Inn has a clarity that I really appreciated. I don't know. There's some of it resonated because depression sucks. And sometimes when I was depressed, I would be riding the trains and just decide to get off in a random station just to see the ocean because I needed to see the ocean or I was not going to be okay. So that was in there and it was like, ah, shit, I feel seen and it does not feel good because it's in this story.
Wow.
And it did connect with me in a real way. And when they mentioned the song at the beginning of this story, I actually was like, you know, I live in the 21st century. Let's do this. And I went and found the song and put it on. So it was playing, the whole score from this movie was playing in the background of Abashiri Prison, was playing in the background where I read the story. And it created and we'll put it in the show notes, you can listen to it yourself. But it created a mood and a real vibe that was consistent. I think that's the word I used, right? I think it was consistent all the way through this, like, you're wandering through a town you've never been to on the train. It's late at night. You can't get back. Someone, you know, a stranger's kind to you, but you're also, you know, a piece of shit. So why should they be nice to you? You know, you're in a bathhouse you have sex with a lady that is dubious. And then you leave. And when you come back a year later, she doesn't remember you because you weren't that important, actually. The end. Oh, sorry. But you find a cat and play with a cat on a beach and you realize that, you know, you're a piece of shit, but at least you're nice to cats. The end. If the children of the internet in 2023 can't relate to that story, I call them liars, I think, because that is what every Twitter thread is right now. Like, oh, I'm a piece of shit, but at least I've got my cat, you know? Like, yeah.
But anyway. I would never put my cat's paws on my eyes because mine would probably extend the claws.
You know, as like a non-cat person, I did ask about that. That seemed very unlikely.
I really am terrified of that and will never do it myself. But if you put your cat's paws on your eyes and it does feel cool, let us know in the comments.
I mean, I will say, like, I'm part of the generation that over-romanticizes the Showa-ness of this, like that era of Japan. I'm probably dating myself, but the first time I went to Japan was in 1973. The yen to dollar ratio was 360 yen to the dollar.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And so I was there when I traveled at that time. I got to see a Japan that was very different than the Japan we see now. Like, more than half of the toilets were squat toilets in the ground. Like, you went to the temple, it was a squat toilet, just a hole in the ground. It was not glamorous at all. You could definitely still feel that tension between the old Japan and the new Japan.
Yeah.
Like, some of the old Japan still existed. And so what I see in Tsuge's photos of that time is it's a Japan that has mostly disappeared. And the stories that he's telling of, you know, these decrepit inns and these back roads and these small towns, it was a time. And it's very hard to find that mood now. So some of it is him over romanticizing this milieu. And it's hard to relate to sometimes because it doesn't exist, for the most part, it doesn't exist anymore.
And the version of it that exists is a theme park version.
Exactly.
So like Showa era stuff that you see that's like, oh, come to Showa Town in like Odaiba or whatever is the Disney version of it. It's not how things were. And for most people, way better. But people do feel like they've lost something. Absolutely. And they, frankly, they did. The war wasn't super easy here. Even, as the aggressors, it did not go well.
Well, that's what happened in Tatsumi's book, right?
Yeah.
Like there was more poverty. Japan was a much poorer country.
Mm-hmm.
So this it's weird because you're reading this mood, right? And if you think about it, he's a peer of Crumb and Spain and all those people who were doing underground comics in the late 60s. I also when I read Nejishiki, I think like, what was it? What did it capture? That people like, what was the mood like to be a 20-something person at that time? What made this story like feel like, whoa, this speaks to me in a way that it maybe doesn't now? I'm not sure.
Are you familiar with Seijun Suzuki, the film director? Branded to Kill, Tokyo Drifter.
Oh, Tokyo Drifter. Yeah.
Yeah, that guy. He is maybe most famous for making a movie that was so weird the studio said, make the next one make sense or else fired. And then he was like, I'm on it. And then he was fired shortly after.
Wow.
But this book, Tsuge's style reminded me of him. And he's also Branded to Kill came out in 1967. He's also a peer of Suzuki. And you can kind of see in the first story in Nejishiki a little bit of that kind of like disjointed storytelling, but that still kind of builds to like a very specific mood. So yeah, there's a ton of, there's a lot of angles to appreciate this one from as well, I guess.
I want you guys to flip to page, I think it's like XLVIII. It's in the essay at the back, and there's an inset image here that's the cover of Modern Comics #1, the magazine for the young sense, and it is the most like late 60s like hippy dippy like pop situation, and this is a magazine that had comics by Tsuge in it. Like, look at this cover illustration and like what the style of like, here, I'll hold it up in case you can't get to that page for whatever reason. But like, this is the style of the cover of the magazine that a Tsuge, like one of the Tsuge stories in this book appeared in. Like, the counterculture sort of was in a different place in Japan because it was importing all the American visual identity and stuff that was going on with the music and stuff like that, but was also like had a lot of other things going on than just that were very uniquely Japanese. And man, I don't know, like I think this essay does a pretty good job of adding cultural context. It is a really long read in a lot of ways, but like, damn, like these things don't feel like the same thing to me, but they were the same thing for the people who were reading them.
Is it similar to like the theme that like Crumb and similar experienced in France, where like they were legit celebrities?
Like Tsuge was legitimately, like if you read this essay, like I can't recommend it to Chip because I know how he hates essays, but I think you should really read this essay. There's a lot in here that you're like, are you serious?
All right.
It's worthwhile.
It really does uncover a lot of stuff and point to a lot of stuff, but specifically about Tsuge's sort of rising fame and why he stopped making comics so much and sort of the revelations there. It's just, it was like, wow, all the bits that I didn't have, I felt like most of them were in the essay at the back.
Yeah.
I don't think, I think you're right. And if the essays had appeared along, well, there's different. I think if the essays had been like, here's what the story meant at the end of every book, at the end of every story, it would have been a very different book. And I don't know that it necessarily would have been better served.
Because didn't we complain about that with Saint Young Men, where it felt like it broke the rhythm of Saint Young Men?
Yeah, we did.
It
absolutely
explained things too much in between.
And we had a different complaint for the Motohagio project as well.
Oh,
we're like,
yes,
when do these stories get printed? We have no idea. They seemed all over the place. Yeah,
we're just never happy, are we?
Young Man was like kind of a comedy, so like that feels like a bit of a different thing than art comics being explained.
True.
Yeah.
Contextualized.
That's true. That's a good point.
The essay is great. There is a bit on this page on 48 in Roman numerals, Christopher. It would have been so much easier if you just said 47. I was like XLVII. But they mentioned like a collection of hardcovers of like popular manga artists. And it's like Tezuka, Ishinomori, Sanpei Shirato, Kazuo Umezo, Takao Saito, who did Gobo 13. Like it sounds almost as if there was like a Malibu Comics sampler in 1992. And it was like Jim Lee, Rob Liefeld, and Art Spiegelman.
But that's like, I bought this book.
Yeah.
Which is Gato.
Like the lineup seems so like Tsuge's clearly counterculture. Like even though like it's not as edgy maybe as it would have been in the 60s to me today, like I can still feel it. And it's so strange to think about him being so counterculture that he became one of the top guys. You know?
Yeah, he's a giant, man.
Yeah.
People really talk about him like Tezuka. Like I would say Tsuge, Tezuka, Ishinomori, Motohagio, kind of like there's like a very small group of manga artists that people will point to and go, they really changed the trajectory of comics in Japan. And his work is, I don't know, it's just weird.
It really did change the trajectory of comics in Japan. I think the I don't know how you feel about the individual works, but I think the work as a whole definitely lives up to this presentation of like a complete 7-volume collection. I think that the work
definitely
really was and is important, because the more of it we read, the more we're going to be able to understand some of the other things that we've read, for sure. It does point out a glaring hole that we should have read some Mizuki by now, 108 episodes in or whatever this one is. I wish we had read some Shigeru Mizuki, because I think it would be illuminating as well.
I will say, though, that Holmberg's essay, he does not hide his contempt as Mizuki, by the way.
I don't know if I'd say contempt, but I definitely think that he has some pretty accurate criticisms about not crediting your assistants. But he also has some pretty accurate criticisms when he says, and that's still a practice that happens today with rare exceptions. Like that's David called out when we read Ajin, Demi-Human.
By panel.
Yeah, panel, like, I got this guy to draw this panel, but here's every assistant who worked on this volume. And that information wasn't taken out of the English edition. And sometimes in the Japanese edition, it'll thank all the assistants, and then it doesn't make it into the English editions even. So it's like, it's
like, I didn't know
forget
that.
about translators wanting cover credit. It's like they won't even credit the people who are drawing the books. Like there's a real problem with crediting creators, I think, in manga. But whatever. Anyway, sorry. Chip, you've been really silent because we've gone off.
Well, I'm now wondering, like, why wouldn't that be the case when it gets adapted into English? Like, what reason would there be to like not include that?
You don't necessarily.
All I can think is that you don't have to, and they're usually included on not necessarily a credits page, but like an author thanks page. They don't always make it into the localizations. I think in recent memory, it's been a lot better in terms of including that kind of thing. But in like the early days of the manga boom, when anything goes,
and still today there's some stuff that doesn't make it in. But I will say, to my mind, Shonen Jump actually, when they started including the author notes, like every volume, the author will write a specific note, and sometimes it's like kind of nice, and sometimes it's like, wow, 8 volumes, who'd have guessed it? And you're like, really? We got a whole page for that for that note? Okay, sure. But yeah, I think Shonen Jump sort of changed the idea of what we wanted from our manga. Oh, that's a different episode. Different episode. But I do think, I wish assistants would get credited. I do think that's something that Mizuki Pro should be doing, because so many people have worked for Mizuki Pro. And I'm glad that there's, Holmberg points out a bunch of stuff. He points to his sources, where there's somebody on Twitter, and we'll link that person in the show notes as well, that's like going through and like piecing together who drew what in a lot of these important Mizuki stories. And I think that that's really interesting.
I've seen a lot of that for like classic Jack Kirby comics or something, where they annotate everything, so it's cool to know there's similar going on for manga as well.
It was interesting because the Tsuge exhibit was in the museum at the same time there was a Wally Wood exhibit.
Oh, jeez.
Wow, that's a lot of drawing.
So like one wing was Tsuge and the other half was Wally Wood. And Wally Wood exhibit, like the last part of the exhibit showed pages that had burned edges or burned pieces because he too dealt with some depression, basically burned a lot of his stuff. So it's, I don't know why. I don't know if that was on purpose to choose having both artists, on the same floor.
Yeah, no kidding.
Double feature, yeah.
It is I guess why is Tsuge fascinating to me? Tsuge is fascinating to me because of his singular vision, and yet the demons he's dealing with. And the parallels between that at the time of underground comics and the social upheaval that was happening in America and Japan at the same time, and how the comics that came out of that time. Yeah, I mean, it bothers me as a woman to read like, whoa, wait, he's dunking this woman, this mute woman, in the water and F's her, and then she wants more. What?
Yeah.
Like, oh, it's disturbing, right? But I still find him fascinating.
Have you played the Nejishiki video games that they mentioned in the essay?
No.
What?
No.
What?
No. Did you?
Maybe you should read the essay.
I guess I need to read the essay.
Oh, I saw those pictures of the things that it's influenced.
Yeah,
it's
I guess
crazy.
there's like a live action movie. There's a video game. The video game's from 1989.
Wow.
Yeah, so Christopher, please hook us up in the show notes. Maybe there's a Let's Play on YouTube somewhere.
There's got to be a Let's Play of that.
There's got to
in the
be
show notes somewhere. But it's ZX Spectrum. I think you can emulate that in browser now. I could probably just embed the whole game into show notes.
That's crazy.
Wow.
Yeah. So I brought Nejishiki to the table because I thought I've been bringing a lot of contemporary stuff, but sometimes I think you need to appreciate rock and roll. Sometimes you got to bring in some of the blues.
Yep.
So I won't do this all the time.
No, I like it. It's always appreciated.
Yeah.
But we'll try.
It'd be nice to have another Dick Fight Island. That's all I'm saying.
Oh, they just announced the third one.
Oh! Yay!
Sublime's
Nice.
It's coming soon. Getting a Dick Fight Island 3. Don't worry.
Exciting. But but we are coming up onto the Yakuza's bias, which is we're back to my old trashy fun. So stay tuned for that. And Cherry Magic. So more trashy fun ahead.
Yeah.
But let's go around the table and let's get some final thoughts. Chris, want to start?
Yeah, I'm going to answer your question with a question. All right. This is the number one thing is like that we're podcast for people who, don't manga pack for people who don't read a lot of manga, but want to learn about manga. Do you think I'm going to start with Chip actually that this
is a good introduction to manga?
To recommend it? Yeah. Who would if you were like trying to think of the ideal, like for me it's like the beguiling customer that buys all the weird shit. This is like even if they started here there'd be no problem. But do you think that in any way this is a good introduction to manga?
No. But only because it doesn't represent a lot more than this. At least in the 100 episodes that we've done. Like, Invitation from a Crab, maybe, but not really. Yeah, I actually, as soon as you asked it, I had the exact same thought about the Beguiling customers. And for anyone that doesn't know, the Beguiling is a comic shop in Toronto that it really kind of specializes in kind of indie counterculture zine style works, and they also sell Daredevil. But yeah, this is a total Beguiling pick right here. I can see me walking in and Alex trying to put it in my hand.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, so it's a great. I mean, it's not an introduction to a bigger world, but I think it's suitable for that kind of comics journal reader, for lack of a better descriptor.
David, you have a reputation as being able to come up with a log line that'll sell any book.
No.
How would you sell this one, man?
I would give this to anyone who knows about underground comics but doesn't read manga. I think it would be a cool first manga for them.
Mm-hmm.
Because this is very much in line with a lot of that stuff. But I actually don't have a good pitch for this one because the stories they have a lot of shared themes, but they don't really hold together as one set for me. So I'd have to know more about Tsuge personally to have a really fast pitch.
I'd probably give it to a woman on a first date, maybe.
My God.
I could see it.
Yeah.
If you didn't want a second share.
Exactly.
Just skip straight to the elopement and owning, co-owning her parents' inn.
Yeah, of course. I forgot about that loophole in the law.
Yeah.
You're sitting on a date. She's like, "What are you into?" And I'm like, "Hotel management." You just slide this book across the table, never breaking eye contact.
But I think my final thought is page 103. I think has my favorite drawing in the book, and I know that someone else also must have liked it because they used it again as the gap between the end of the book and the essay on page. What is it? 70 something. Anyway, it's a guy standing next to a train in the night in the dark.
Yeah.
And just I love these kinds of drawings. It's like urban ennui, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Same.
But Tsuge nailed it. And this whole story kind of like expresses that kind of feeling. I don't know. It's good, very good grasp of tone.
Yeah.
Let's say.
For sure. Instead of my final thoughts, I'm going to give this one of my highest recommendations of use of color. The first few pages where they use the color, very good. Very good. That red and the placement of the red, I love it. On page 12, the guy at the top holding the wrench, being backed by that red color, is just so cool and graphic and scary and creepy as a result of that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, good use of color.
I am glad to read this because I am a big fan, of Yoshiharu Tatsumi's work. And that was released well before, I think almost a decade before this was released. And they were contemporaries, although Tsuge was definitely more respected sort of during his time and broke through more. And it was interesting to see that this was like, Tatsumi famously said, "I never worked for Garo." I think he did like one cover or two covers for them and did maybe an interview there. And he's like, "I never worked for them. They didn't pay enough. I had bills to pay." And so Tsuge's work ran in Garo and other sort of similar, like, as he started going, more artsy and more like youth-oriented comics magazines, whereas Tatsumi's work mostly appeared in the Japanese edition of Playboy, which people really did read for the articles in the 60s. And so Tatsumi's work is more, I think, story-oriented and visceral, like, here is a terrible thing that I came across in my life that I am sharing with you as a comic story about people living in Tokyo, whereas these are progressively more abstract in different ways, but still have that same vibe of like some terrible shit's going on in the city and we're not really talking about it in mainstream culture because we need to sort of be looking forward and rebuilding after the war. And I think that this adds a fuller picture to that. And I think that that's really fascinating. I would love to pick a Tatsumi work on one of the short story collections for an episode in the future, just to see if it vibes more with Chip, with where you're at in terms of like the storytelling, because they're not dissimilar works, but I think they show very different takes on the same sort of ennui.
Yeah, I should say I do like this. It just doesn't fully vibe. That's all.
Yeah, I would. Yeah, so if you're like, I want to get into this kind of material, but maybe you guys on Mangasplaining have scared me off of this particular volume, go check out the Tatsumi short story collections, Band in the Old in Tokyo, The Pushman, and what is the third one? I can't remember. Show notes. Sorry, early here. That's my final thought. Deb, you want to wrap us up? What do you think?
All right. Well, one thing, as we're heading into almost our 100th episode of Mangasplaining, I knew that this wasn't a title to bring up early. It wasn't available early either, but I think Tsuge is an important creator, and I think it's worth talking about and seeing his work. As much as I complain about Ryan Holmberg's essay being a slog, I'm glad it's there. I learned a lot, and I'm grateful that he gives context to this work in a way that I wouldn't have had otherwise. I just think it's important to read the comics first and just experience it.
Yeah.
And sit in the uncomfortableness and sit in the mystery and sit in the what the hell's going on here, and then read the essays. Because I think that's a better experience. I agree it's not for everybody, but I think if you're serious and want to understand manga, particularly because there's a huge gap in what is available in English, because most the manga boom in America happened after the 90s. And a lot of manga that was published before the 80s just never gets a chance in English because it's too old or too weird. So I'm glad that this Drawn and Quarterly got it. I'm glad they're putting it out with such care and thought. It's not for everybody, but if you're curious about, what was going on the same time as the underground scene in America, check it out. It'll be worth your while.
Nice.
That's it for this particular part of Mangasplaining. We will be back after this message, and we'll see what else we want to talk about.
Grand Canyon University's RN to BSN online degree program makes earning your bachelor's in nursing possible. Balance online coursework with local in-person clinicals to position yourself for potential leadership opportunities in the time you have from wherever you are, leaving room for what matters. Achieve your goals with your personalized plan and team behind you. Find your purpose at Grand Canyon University. Visit gcu.edu.
All right, and now for something a little different. We're just going to talk about things we like, otherwise known as the shoutouts. Let's see, who wants to start this time?
I'll leap on that grenade.
Oh, well, yeah. Erase me out of that
volunteer to go first.
No, I was going to say I had an announcement, but it's more of a announcement.
Oh, no.
No, not too bad, thankfully. I wanted to say, in the interest of openness or whatever, that I started doing some consulting work for Kodansha. So now the whole podcast is even more compromised than it already was. Yeah, right? So we can't really talk about Biz or Kodansha anymore. And I'm going to try and collect the set. I'm going to get Chip a consulting at Yen somehow. That'll be really fun. Yeah, so that we can't really talk about anything.
Yeah, I was going to say.
I'm super compromised if you're going by that, then.
Well, we always try to keep our personal or work biases out of it and talk about things in a fair way, but also you got to disclose up front.
So I'm sorry, is your shout out Kodansha? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I
Go
know.
For it.
Wow.
Good manga's good manga. Go for it.
Amazing.
So because I'm doing some consulting work for Kodansha now, I'm reading every single Kodansha book that I can, at least one volume of every Kodansha book now. Or I'm trying to anyway. I'm doing a bad job of it, unfortunately, but I keep working. But because of that, I just caught up on What Did You Eat Yesterday, because that was the one I needed to read the least, but it was also the most fun. And man, I miss food manga. I wish we got to do a food manga right at the beginning of next season, because it's so good and it's such a sweet episode. It's the one about the two gay guys who are just living together and making food for each other, and stuff happens in their lives, and it's so cute and so nice, and I totally, totally love it. So What Did You Eat Yesterday? But also the new one that I read that I really liked actually was don't want to get the name wrong.
While you look that up, I'm just going to mention that Jocelyn also shouted out What Did You Eat Yesterday on the episode we recorded last week.
Mm-hmm.
She shouted out her own book that she translated?
So there you go.
I think she was watching the drama or the animation, maybe.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that was it. She shouted out the...
I feel like it's a different thing to shout out the book that you translated versus the one that you wrote or illustrated.
An episode about the book that you translated.
Yeah.
Okay. After all that and even butting in, I can't find my iPad. Is not pulling up my books. It is amazing. Sorry, David. Do you want to go?
Yeah. No, mine is. You guys know the Taschen art book company? They do the giant, expensive art books.
Oh yeah.
Well, they also do have a series called Taschen Basic, which are $20 starter, beginner's guide to Impressionism or Rodin or various artists architects, all kinds of stuff. I've recently gotten into these little books. They're almost when they put Wikipedia into a book and they call it an encyclopedia. It's kind of that kind of vibe.
Okay, yeah.
But lots of pictures, lots of interesting info. It's almost like a beginner's approach to anything about art. And I really like the series. There's 78 different books. So if you're curious about anything about art, or you kind of want to go broaden your horizons intentionally, poke around. Buy a Taschen Basic book that costs $20 a piece. They're really handsome, really nice.
Sounds good.
I think I've got
so many Taschen
4
books
or 5 now.
Before I moved. Yeah, they're awesome. I totally agree with you there. Oh, and my book that I found it, by the way, is Run Away With Me, Girl. It is a 3-volume series by Batan, and it is sort of a Yuri romance, but it's about a girl who's in just sort of a shitty relate. It's like the inverse of almost like the inverse of the one even though we're adults that we read. That's about two women and like instead of this one like the lesbian is like shy and retiring, and then the girl who's trying to figure out her stuff and has like a shitty husband is like, let's just run away together and whatever, and they're just like, oh my god, is this girl serious? So it's really great and fun and cute. But yeah, you actually just made me really miss Taschen books, because I had so many of them actually when I had a house that had books, and they'd be so pretty and I would learn so much
like
about
the most mature thing that I own.
So like it's just like, oh, I'm gonna learn about male nudes, and then I'm gonna learn about 20th century pop art design, and then I'm gonna learn about male nudes volume 2, and then I'm gonna. It's great. You're probably not reading as many of the male nudes as I did.
Maybe.
I think we go to different stores to buy art books. Maybe.
Maybe.
Chip, do you have a shout out? Anything you've liked in the last week?
Really, the only thing I've consumed in the last week is something I quite enjoyed, so I'll give it a shout out here. It's the book Okinawa, published by Manga.
Oh, come on!
Mangasplaining Press, MSX,
and Fantagraphics.
And Fantagraphics, of course. Finally, just read the whole thing in preparation for David and myself's interview with Andrew and Jocelyn, and I loved it. Yeah, I thought it was an amazing book, and I highly recommend it to everyone in the world.
Wow.
Even though, once again, I will say this, I don't make a dime off of it.
Thanks, Chip.
Published by Mangasplaining. I don't make a dime off of it.
It is weird. The perfect beginner manga for everyone ever.
That should be the pull quote in the back of the book, right? I didn't make a damn dime off of this.
We'll have to include that on the soft cover.
Yeah.
Good.
At least the digital edition, like a little Eisner Award bug.
Yeah.
Chip will come up with a fake.
Oh, and by the way, congratulations on your Eisner.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you.
Also, your
maybe one day I'll see it in person.
Book of the Year nomination. My goodness.
Yeah. Book of the Year. I can't wait to lose to Kate Beaton. It's going to be great.
Oh, come on.
Yeah.
At least I'm losing to another Canadian. That's nice.
Or you could lose to Hayao Miyazaki. Ha ha ha! Sorry.
The Revenge of Nausicaa.
There's so many people to lose to.
Oh well.
Nice.
That's okay.
Yeah.
It's being nominated is the honor.
You know what? Yeah, I'm normally a nomination. I'm like, okay, whatever. But like,
Book of the Year. That's good.
Feels a little special. Yeah.
Especially for public domain, which is your original work. So.
Yeah. Yay me.
Yay you. Okay. So what's my shout out? I'll go at recency bias again for $500, Alex. I read this new webtoon called Tata the Cat that just blew me away how much I loved it. So about a young girl who goes back to the countryside to visit her grandma. She recently moved to Seoul with her family. She's hating school. She goes back. In the backyard of her grandma's house is a big tree, and then there's what looks like a giant flower bud hanging from it. The grandma goes, oh yeah, that weird flower popped up after the last meteor shower. And then the bud starts shaking, and out of it pops a big fat orange cat. And what the grandmother tells her is that big fat orange cat is a spitting image of the Tata, the cat, who used to hang out at their yard 30 years ago. So the cat has has a flower on its head, and the cat can now fly. And the cat, basically all the aunts and uncles become like pictures of Tata the cat get spread around, and they go, oh my God, we have to come home and see this cat. And it's just it's just this amazing story. It's so magical and charming and kind of wistful and nostalgic, but kind of mysterious too, because you kind of, is it like a Pet Cemetery thing where the cat came back from the dead and it's not really the cat?
Oh man.
And then the original owner of the cat died through some mysterious circumstances, so you don't know if that has anything to do with it. And what did the meteor shower have to do with anything anyway? But I love it. I spent money on that. It only has 10 chapters out, and the first 5 chapters are free, and then the rest you got to pay some coins. I just immediately went all in on it. I love it. It's kind of magical and mysterious, and it's cute, but not cutesy. I think it's worth checking out. It's very special. It's one of the rare webtoon stories that isn't about a extreme bullying in the classroom or a villain is coming back from the dead.
I definitely just imagined like Heathcliff for your orange cat in this one.
Way cuter. But go read. I love it. It's my new obsession.
Nice.
All right. And that was another episode of Mangasplaining. Stick around for more soonish, I guess.
With everything you have on your plate, earning your degree online seems impossible. But at Grand Canyon University, we specialize in helping you fit a master's degree in education into your busy day. Your graduation team, led by your own GCU counselor, provides you with the personal support you need to succeed. Achieve your goals with a plan and team behind you. Find your purpose at Grand Canyon University. Visit gcu.edu.